Okay, so today we're going to be doing something a little different. Me talking about my own book, The Scrolls of Apollonia. Scroll 1, The Monster. This book took me 10 years to write. It's not for the faint of heart. What's unique about this book is that you, as the reader, are a part of the story. You are a character in the tale. Let me show you what I mean. First, I'm going to read the back so you understand what this is about. When it was first reported that a team of archaeologists had discovered cursed scrolls written in a time before history, most scholars were skeptical, to say the least. The story is that a shepherd who, while praying in a cave near the southern coast of Mygdonia, found a bronze basket with 7 large scrolls in it. Not knowing what to make of his discovery, he brought the basket to his pastor in Thessalonica. Shortly thereafter, both men ended up dead. This was the first sign that there was something in this alluring basket of words that was not supposed to get out. The first scroll of Apollonia tells the story of how a civil war became a world war, and how a world war destroyed a magical land of immense art and wealth, where fairy tale lives were the norm and dreams were a reality. The world was divided between the gods Apollo and Artemis, who represented the sun and moon respectively. When Dominique La Celeste, the daughter of the Fletcher of Dantea, fell in love with her enemy, Rexel Lightborn, the son of the bowmaster of Apollonia, the end of time itself was set into motion. Theirs is a timeless story of tragedy and betrayal that can only be described as monstrous. Okay. So this is where you come in. Because of the calamities presented in these scrolls and the subsequent tragedies that have occurred since their rediscovery, some audacious scholars continue to make the claim that these scrolls are cursed, and that reading them could put one's life in peril. Obviously, claims such as these cannot be substantiated. Nevertheless, here is a warning. If you do choose to read these scrolls, please do so very carefully. So that's a warning, right? It's an ancient tale with ancient scrolls that were found. And they seem cursed because everyone who seems to come in contact with them or read this. So the story synopsis ends with a warning. And that warning continues. This book begins with a warning to readers. What is this warning to readers? It says, the line between fact and fiction is paper thin, so it must be pointed out here that reading fiction can in fact be a dangerous thing. After all, paper cuts can make you bleed. Nonetheless, a paper cut is the least of the dangers to which I am referring. The following tale has been stricken to the fantasy genre, but that does little good for those poor souls who believe that this scroll leaves real-life tragedies in its wake. Skeptics remind us that the story is just a myth, and whatever unfortunate incidents occur around the same time the scroll enters one's life are all just coincidental. The following tale is a paradox. It is at once inviting and foreboding. It is easy to read, yet difficult to comprehend. And its end is just the beginning, which for some is the beginning of the end. In short, before you read any further, it must be noted here that you are doing so at your own risk. So if you do decide to continue, it must be advised, again, Please read very carefully. So, as you can see, to read this book, it's a big decision. I wouldn't go into this lightly. This is going to take a lot out of you. But the reward, I think the reward is great. No risk, no reward, right? The old saying. It's very much true here. And the role the reader plays in this cannot be overstated, because not only are you making a decision with your own safety and mental health to read this, it continues on, because, as we say, there was a discovery of scrolls. So we got like maps, we got timelines here, you know, but it really begins with the scraps of the scroll that were found. And this is going to be confusing for some, because it is confusing. It's supposed to be. When you discover something new, you have to make sense of it. And so you're asking a lot of questions as you're processing the information that's within it. And that's what's happening here. So these are the found scraps. So it starts with scroll 1, verse 1. Since the dawn of time, the shapers have sung songs about the mighty Apollo, the charioteer of the sun. Apollo was the keeper of day. It was his job to fly the sun's chariot across the sky, from east to west, arching like a bow, shining light on all those who followed his way. One boy received more light from Apollo than anyone else. The sun rose, so a sun rose. That enlightened boy was named Jankin Astrophil. And it cuts ahead to verse 7. The light of Apollo guided Jankin's path. The brilliance of the teacher helped the student find his way in the world. Jankin Astrophil changed his name to Apollonius Magnus. This was to indicate that he was the greatest student of Apollo. He inherited the golden bow from his teacher and became the second bowmaster. So now we're starting to get a picture here. And it cuts to verse 19. In 27 AT, Apollonius Magnus, formerly known as Jankin Astrophil, founded a university nation in the upper reaches of Locum Heliconium, which he named Apollonia. And these verses just keep jumping. So you got like 153, 161, 173, 184. So it's not the complete picture, but it's enough that we can almost fill in the blanks ourselves. And it continues and actually jumps way ahead. In the year 287 AT, Apollonia was being threatened with extinction. The world that Apollo and Jankin helped create a little over 2.5 centuries earlier found itself on the brink of total annihilation. Whoa. So we jump ahead like 250 years and it's a different world. It's the end, it seems like. We see the beginning, we see the end, about a 250-year period between. We continue. The Apollonian people were at war with one another, and that bloody civil war started to extend beyond the borders of Apollonia and began to encroach upon the adjacent lands of Vandoria and Dontea. The nations of Vandoria and Dontea still followed the old way, and that made the expansion of the Apollonian Civil War a major problem for the world. Before Apollonius Magnus became the bowmaster and introduced an entirely new way of life into the locum, the old way was the prominent system of belief in every nation except for Altar. The old way viewed the moon not as a mere reflection of Apollo's light, but as a much better medium through which to receive gifts from on high. Since they didn't follow the sun, it seemed only natural that followers of the moon would have a colder, darker view of the world. The Vandorians and Danteans were warlike spiritual people who were less than keen on being invaded by anyone, never mind the biggest threat to their way of life, the Apollonians. Apollonia was falling apart, losing battles, lives, and its ideals, all in one fell swoop. A vicious civil war was raging, destroying that once great nation from within like a poison. The Danteans claimed that they were going to do whatever it took to further destroy Apollonia. The present story takes place at this pivotal time, right before what seemed to be certain doom for Apollo's land of light. The Danteans possessed the most powerful weapon in the Locum's 9 nations. The Fletcher, Dominic Lon Celeste, told the Council of Nine that he was going to unleash the monster if the Apollonians did not stay on their side of the Laurel River. Dominic then went on to clarify his threatening statement with a bit more political adeptness, telling his fellow council members that using this weapon against the Apollonians was not about revenge, as many might claim, but about the safety of Dantea and all those who followed the moon. It was difficult to tell if there was malicious misdirection in his delivery. In the heat of these deliberations, the wingman of Byron, Pike Raz, stood up in spite of his handicap and said what most of the council was thinking. The reason Dantea wants to attack Apollonia has nothing to do with feeling threatened by the encroachment of a foreign civil war, and we all know it. The Fletcher responded to that accusation by speaking in half-truths. The fact that unleashing the monster gives Dantea an opportunity to avenge the wrongs done to it by that abhorrent nation and its brainwashing university is merely circumstantial, just an added gift of the Huntress. So that's the end of the scrap portion. And then we jump right into the prologue, Understanding Time, which could also be read as Understanding Time. You are both understanding the concept and entity that is time, but it's also, time to understand what's going on, because that was a little confusing, and it's supposed to be. You're discovering the scrolls. You're in that position. You are part of this story. Okay? So we read in the prologue. It was breaking news. The International Times of Providence reported that a team of highly respected archaeologists had discovered scrolls that were written in a time before history. If that claim was hard to swallow, then the claim that these scrolls were also cursed by something demonic would trigger a gag reflex. Nevertheless, a surprising number of scholars agree that a compelling case has been put forth for both of these claims. The story is that a shepherd who, while praying in a cave near the southern coast of Mygdonia, found a bronze basket with 7 large scrolls in it. Not knowing what to make of his discovery, he brought the basket to his pastor in Thessalonica. Shortly thereafter, both men ended up dead. This was the first sign that there was something in this alluring basket of words that was not supposed to get out. It took nearly 3.5 decades of relentless discovery and research by some of the most courageous archaeologists, translators, and poets that the world had to offer in order to make sense of these fragmented scrolls of bronze, papyrus, and vellum. The sacrifice that these men and women made, some with their lives, will not soon be forgotten. So it is with the utmost gratitude and respect for these brave, gifted scholars that I introduce to the world the story that will transform history into the stuff of legend and legend into the stuff of prophecy. The first scroll of Apollonia the present book, tells the story of how a civil war became a world war and how a world war destroyed a magical land of immense art and wealth where fairy tale lives were the norm and dreams were a reality. To understand the scroll and the paradisical land it depicts, the modern reader must first come to grips with an understanding of time that is very different from what he or she is used to. The first scroll is for the most part centered around events that take place during the two most significant epochs in Apollonian time. The Golden Age of Apollonia, which is 27 to 54 AT, and the last generation of Apollonia, 264 to 287 AT. These two spans of time are the anchoring points for the timeline in this scroll. They are juxtaposed not only to each other, but also to other points in the past, which have also had some bearing on the events at hand. That is to say, this scroll was written with these two different time periods coalescing and overlapping in order to show how the past plays a crucial part in shaping the circumstances of the present and future. But more than just highlighting historical parallels and allusions, this merging and converging of time periods is also used above all else as a literary device to emphasize, embody, and encapsulate the Apollonian belief in the eternal now. What is the eternal now? In our current day and age, we think of time as linear, where the past precedes the present and the present precedes the future, all on the same timeline, always moving forward and never backward. These scrolls, on the other hand, subscribe to a more cyclical notion of time. It is an understanding that time does not exist as a line, but rather as an ever-turning dial that is always spinning by degrees and clicking into place. The place that time's great dial is ever clicking into is the moment that we define as the present. As such, all of time is present in the present, with the past and future encircling now on both sides and even meeting behind its back, as it were. If this roundabout explanation of time seems confusing, don't worry. It is all quite simple. All one really needs to understand about the eternal now is that no matter what time period one is in, past, present, or future, he or she can only exist in the present. Simply put, it is always now. And the stars here on the page indicate that there's a shift in perspective here. So then we read, his dark hood hung low on his brow, leaving a void where his eyes should have been. The old bookseller took the runaway into his den and began to explain the secret, forbidden knowledge of all ages. He unrolled his scroll and began to tell his story. In the year 264 AT, the seed of hatred between those who follow the sun and those who follow the moon was replanted. The peace that had existed in the locum for more than a century and a half came to an abrupt end. 23 years later, in 287 AT, that seed blossomed into all-out war. The pregnancy of the Dantean teen, Dominique La Celeste, changed the world. Not since the end of the Golden Age, when Dantes the pupil betrayed his teacher Apollonius Magnus, had such a shift in thinking been ushered in with a single event. To understand why Dominique's pregnancy was such a calamity for the locum, one must understand who she was and the culture in which she was raised. She was the daughter of the Fletcher of Dantea, Damon La Celeste. The Fletcher was the highest position in any nation that followed the old way. When one became the Fletcher, he was presented with the lunate arrow, the silver arrow, which symbolized the huntress's celestial power. To most Danteans, Dominique's pregnancy was tantamount to treason. To them, she had turned her back on her family, her nation, and worst of all, the old way. The Danteans were a conservative sort, and they held their women to what many in the 9 nations would claim was an unrealistic standard of virtue. Nevertheless, it was not her liberal sexuality that was the problem. It was her partner in crime. Dominique La Celeste had fallen in love with Rexel Lightborn, the son of the 9th bowmaster of Apollonia. The bowmaster was both the leader of the Apollonian people as well as the foremost teacher of Apollonian life in the world. One could think of the bowmaster as a wise wizard king who encouraged culture and light to thrive by using the magic of education to spell things out and charm minds with brilliance. The desire to learn was viewed as the most heroic ideal in Apollonian society. Thus, wisdom was the greatest Apollonian strength. This strength was embodied in the figure of the bowmaster, whose mantra was, "One must question everything, especially answers." The Apollonians believed that learning was arrived at through skepticism, and that only by challenging everything could one understand anything. The Apollonians revered the bowmaster tradition with the utmost veneration. The position was the closest thing they had to a god on earth. In fact, the first bowmaster was a god on earth. And after Apollo, the sun god, hung up the golden bow, the second bowmaster stepped forward, Apollonius Magnus. His name was grand, but his way was humble. He was content to simply be called Apple. And because of this, apples have come to be seen as a symbol of knowledge and are given to teachers as a sign of respect and admiration. Apple was the world's foremost teacher, and his knowledge seemed boundless. Audacious shapers even claimed that he knew the secret to immortality. He may have even written it down, some say. And that's the end of the prologue. And then you go right into chapter 1, which is called Mastering the Bow. Hence, the bowmaster. "Oh, great. Now look what you've done," the old man said to himself with self-reproach. He daintily pinched what seemed to be the only dry spot of the feather and lifted it gently out of the puddle of ink that he had just spilled on the parchment. It looked like a crime scene of the written word. The quill, the victim. The parchment was ruined, but the old man was determined to give the feather its life back. "All I have to do is..." He was lost in thought as he pressed the feather between the 2 blank pieces of parchment, using them to soak up the excess ink like 2 literary sponges. To the old man's surprise and delight, the feather left its mark on both sheets quite distinctly. This is where the story begins. And then you go right into it. So what we have here is a story of a discovery of cursed scrolls. And for some reason, an old bookseller has this scroll, and he's reading it to a runaway in his den. And you're also reading it. So are you the old bookseller? Are you the runaway? Who is the runaway? And how does this book affect you just by reading it? These are questions you have to answer for yourself.